something that looks diagnostic, like depression or anxiety symptoms. But the beautiful alchemy that the book suggests is that whatever that is for you, whatever those symptoms, even if it's just kind of rolling anxiety or a feeling of emptiness, despair, or dread, that there's a glorious transgressive potential in that. I think especially in depression, usually people who are depressed are people who are not okay with the way the world is or the way things are in some sense. And so the book suggests and provides a process for alchemizing that into the kind of lightning bolt of transgression that it could be. And I think we are all called in this moment to bring that about individually and collectively.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Giss McDonald, founder and CEO of Paper Raven Books, and I have with us the author of a brand new book called Heal Your Witch Wound, a magical depth approach to reclaiming creative and intuitive potency and reawakening the female soul voice. Annalise Oatman, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Morgan. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, we are so excited. This is one heck of a book that you are launching, and I'm really excited that we get to be a part of it with you. We were just talking before we hit record on this. This book is, I think it's going to be, I would say earth-shattering, but like in a positive way, like groundbreaking in a positive way. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and who it's for?
Sure. Yeah, there's so much that I could say about this. It's difficult to encapsulate it in a sentence or a phrase, but if I had to really put it in a nutshell, I would say that it's about processes of deep transformation that people, but especially women and people identified with the feminine, go through with regards to claiming deep, authentic, fierce femininity and deeper ways of knowing. So that's it in a very brief nutshell. And having said that, I would say that the book was written especially with women in mind and women in their 20s and 30s. But it's really for anyone going through any kind of process of deep transformation where they're shedding the old, shedding something that was inauthentic or shame-based, and stepping into a more naked, magnetic, and true version of themselves in the world. Whether that's the end of a relationship or I could say more. Were you going to say something, Morgan?
No, I'm just agreeing with you. I mean, I think we feel this like this moment of transformation. I don't know if it's personal, I don't know if it's collective, but like we are really transforming. What do you see? Because you see clients in a private practice, and what like you see women who are in their 20s and 30s. What kinds of transformations do you see them going through right now?
I mean, I guess the first thing that I would say in response to that is that we all of us right now, no matter who we are, what we're trying to do or what we're going through, we're all trying to do something that's never been done before, which is essentially figure out life during what could be a major extinction event on the planet, and major cultural and societal upheaval happening. I mean, we live in a time of strife in a lot of ways.
And what kind of new perspective or lens does this book bring to, let's say, especially young women, right? Because that's really who we feel will be most inspired by, or maybe relate most directly to this book. What is it about being a young woman in this age that we lost, that you hope this book helps us to find again?
Yeah, essentially, I alternately refer to it as feminine consciousness or the feminine soul voice. You could call it the feminine principle or the deep feminine. The book is about these strange moments of reclamation that happen to us in our lives, where this new way of seeing breaks through, like a more feminine way of seeing. And that's particularly important at this moment in history, because there are so many different ways that part of us can try to break through, and it sometimes does through what I call in the book soul letters. And soul letters can even be something that looks diagnostic, like depression or anxiety symptoms. but the beautiful alchemy that the book suggests is that whatever that is for you, whatever those symptoms, even if it's just kind of rolling anxiety or a feeling of emptiness, despair, or dread, that there's a glorious transgressive potential in that. I think especially in depression, usually people who are depressed are people who are not okay with the way the world is or the way things are in some sense. And so the book suggests and provides a process for alchemizing that into the kind of lightning bolt of transgression that it could be. And I think we are all called in this moment to bring that about individually and collectively, to let that deeper level of truth speak through us.
You were trained in clinical, mental health world, right? You went through the graduate programs. You went through, I think you even talked about being inspired by Carl Jung, and you bring this whole other level of magic. How does this book kind of bring the practical and the magical together? What can you kind of tease us with some of the things that you share with us in the book?
Oh, that's a challenging but really yummy question. I'll see what I can do with that. Anyone who's ever practiced magic in any form or played with divination in any form, even if you are a devoted materialist, rationalist, skeptic, I swear to God, some of the smartest people I know, if they ever play with these things, they're like, oh God, yeah, there really is something to this. Something is happening here. There's some kind of uncanny synchronicity that I'm calling into being when I practice magic or divination. Essentially, if you flip from saying that material or matter is the primary medium of reality to maybe something else is, I don't know if it's consciousness or something, some other radical mystery or radical freedom of some kind, then suddenly this kind of a causal connectedness makes a lot more sense. And so I'm there's a quiet revolution of Copernican dimensions happening in the scientific world right now, where there's this kind of flip taking place from materialism to maybe something else is the primary medium of reality. And there are a lot of people digging their heels in really, really hard. But I think that, as a clinician, part of what is grounded in science. And it has to be. As a technician in that sense, I've sort of flipped to, maybe there is some kind of radical mystery at the heart of reality. When we reclaim these parts of ourselves, there's an archetypal core to them. And it seems to me that once you start interacting with those archetypes, which is really a secular term for spirits or powers, magnitudes, you invite that a causal level of reality, or you could even call it the narrative layer of reality, where things are helplessly meaningful. Everything has some kind of meaning,
especially if we're exhibiting what some other people might call depression, or like this feeling of meaninglessness. What your book gives us is an ability to see a magical, mysterious realm that is distinctly feminine and contains within archetypes that help us to make meaning or see meaning, or finally realize meaning that was already always there, in a way that heals us and helps us to sort of move into that other version of ourselves. Am I relaying this in a way that
yeah, totally. Yeah, you got it. I can tell you've read the book.
I have read the book. You and I have been working with this book for a while.
We know it inside and out.
That's right. So what I love, and so some of the archetypes that are in this book, they're based on fairy tales, right? Like, where do some of these archetypes come from?
Yeah, I mean, the archetypes can be found in fairy tales, mythology, folk tales, transculturally, and throughout history. We find these motifs repeating themselves over and over again in myth and story. And so in a way, fairy tale becomes sort of a map for these processes of deep transformation.
Give us some examples. What are some like motifs or archetypes that we might recognize?
Ooh, well, one that the book really plays with is looking at the Russian fairy tale called Vasilisa the Beautiful. It's about a maiden who leaves her village and goes out into the woods, of course, and ends up in the home of the crone, essentially, Lady Death, who in that tale is called Baba Yaga. So, you know, you have the maiden, there's one archetype, you have the crone, and you have she has a little doll that speaks to her as she's wandering through the woods. And it's sort of like the voice of intuition, the voice of the soul, the voice of this deeper, wider part of us that we have to listen to on our journey. Ultimately, that's beyond our everyday ego self. And which was given to her by her mother, right? There's another archetype. Of course, there are wicked stepsisters. I suppose that's kind of another archetype. Yeah, I could say more. It goes on, but there's a little example.
And what are some of the ways that you have either yourself or with clients have worked with these archetypes to help kind of bring meaning and healing into either your life or someone else's life?
Oh, that's a good question. I love that. One of the patterns or themes that I've noticed, especially in working with women in my practice, is that there tends to be a kind of good girl mask that takes different forms that different women develop across the course of their lives, and that they need to drop or shed in some sense. And they might be totally identified with it to different degrees, but underneath that, there's an exiled, disowned, buried part in the underworld of the psyche, if you will, that is usually connected more to the fierce feminine, or something that's badass, something that's fiery. And different women I've worked with have played with different archetypes to represent the energetic core of that part that's been repressed and buried, and to bring her back. And it's usually something to do with the fierce feminine, this aspect of the feminine that isn't really appreciated, recognized, or understood at all, really, in the West. So I love helping women bring that back.
And I mean, would you say that's part of the reason why we are experiencing some of these symptoms? Some of these symptoms bubble up, like depression, anxiety, meaninglessness, because we have repressed some true core aspect of ourselves. Is that kind of the underlying thought?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's sort of like you have internal board members, and one of them has been exiled. And when you start to have those symptoms, it's like the exiled board member is kind of sending messages up through the laundry chute, or like sending them through the mail slot, and saying like, hey, you're out of balance. Something is out of balance here. I'd like to come back and be part of the board. And that's kind of what's happening collectively right now too.
It's like we can see it in each other. Like I've been a part of like different female entrepreneur organizations, and it's like you're in a room, or these days a Zoom room, and you're trying to tell one woman like, you're amazing, you're brilliant, and she's like not able to really sort of take that in because she hasn't really owned that part of herself. And it's like, well, I can see that in you. What am I not seeing in myself too? Like, where am I not spending the time in self-reflection? And I think it's one of the beautiful things about this book, about Heal Your Witch Wound, is like you give us the time and the space to really say, okay, like what if I have repressed something? What could that look like? What could my life look like sort of on the other side of that? And I guess I'd love to know, like, when someone walks through this journey with you, whether it's been a client that you've worked with, or whether it's someone who's reading the pages of Heal Your Witch Wound, when she gets to the end, what do you hope that she sees or acknowledges or knows about herself?
Hmm. I hope that she has come through whatever initiation or transformation she's going through right now, feeling like a complete badass, feeling like Vasilisa with the skull torch, which if you read the fairy tale, you'll know what I mean. But just feeling fierce and feeling complete and robust on her own. That doesn't mean she doesn't need other people, because we all do. But living her life from the inside out, knowing for sure what's hers, what are her values and what are other people's values, and committed to that heroic journey of living her life from the I just came up with this idea, the soul side out. Instead of taking dictation about how she should live from the values and standards and appearances of the society and people around her. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, because people have their own values. But I would want her to find the true happiness, joy, and fulfillment that comes from knowing her own values and knowing who she is at a deep level, and being awake at a deep level to who she is, and living in alignment with that. It's like, once you have that, no one can ever take that away from you.
Oh, so good. If y'all are watching or listening and you're like, that book is for me, go to paperravenbooks.com/heal your witch wound. You can actually get a free copy today. So we're launching the book, and as part of that launch, we're giving away free copies of the ebook. You can go grab a copy today, paperravenbooks.com/heal your witch wound. Go ahead and do that while you're here, while you're thinking about it. You can always go ahead and download it, and you can read it, over the weekend or next week. But go ahead and get a copy now while you can, and that way it is there and ready for you to dive into. And Annalise, people are always curious about writing a book, the process of writing a book. I guarantee you, as soon as you launch this, this book is launching, you're probably going to get text messages, people saying, Annalise, how'd you write this book? And I know for you, from our earlier conversations, like, you identify as a writer, like you knew that this was going to be the first book of more than one book, and that you wanted to continue to be a writer sort of throughout your life. And some people would say, well, you just sit down and you just channel the book and it just comes out. And that's not usually my experience with people's books. It's usually a transformational process, right? Yeah. What has writing this book been like for you?
Yeah, I could say a lot about that. Before I started working with Morgan and Paper Raven Books, I knew that I wanted to write this book since about 2015. And I started trying to write it in 2017 all on my own. And it ended, I think I wrote about 80 pages, but it was totally constipated. I was trying to, make it really good, like writing deathless prose in the first draft. And it just wasn't, it just wasn't feeling like a good book to me, honestly, even though I was trying so hard, which I think is what a lot of people do.
Oh yeah.
When they don't know the process of writing a book. And so I learned all about, the shitty first draft with Morgan, and I set aside 5 hours every Friday for about a year, a little over a year is all it took. And I kind of flew through the shitty first draft because I took Morgan's advice of just keep your fingers flying. And I think that's brilliant because it actually allows the creative right brain side of you to take over that part of the process, which is so important for any kind of creative work, because then it has that vital pulse to it, where it's not all your left brain and your ego trying to be so good. You have to have that childlike play, loose freedom coming through in the first draft. So I actually flew through that. And then kind of trundled my way through the early developmental revisions. And then I went really deep with the final revisions. I actually took a couple months to do that and to give it as much time as I possibly could and really, really beautify it and bring my left brain in then.
Yes, that's a great and super helpful distinction, is like, if we think about our own creativity in terms of right and left, and that right is more loose and will take the crazy ideas and run with them, and left is a little bit more critical, often in a good way. The left
Yeah.
helps us refine and polish. Yeah, just let the right lead for the first part, and then
Right.
then bring the left in afterward.
Right, right. It reminded me of sculpting actually, where it's like I let my right brain create this huge mound of clay or this kind of like rough hewn sculpture. And then my left brain was like, okay, now I'm gonna go in and do the beautiful details.
Oh, that's perfect. I love it.
Yeah.
So now you're in the middle of launching this book, and you've come all the way through this process, Annalise. You're here. Sort of what you could say is the finish line. It's kind of the beginning of the next marathon, but that's fine. But is there anything that you've learned kind of to this point that you would love to go back and share with a younger version of yourself? Words of encouragement or inspiration or lessons learned that you'd love to share with her?
Yes, I would say just trust your own weird creative visions, even if no one else does right now, as long as you trust that genuine inspiration that you're getting and you write from the bone of truth of what it's like for you to be a human encountering this world. It will resonate with people. It will be powerful. You will move through the stages of intense vulnerability, and you'll become another person, a new version of yourself in the process, and really wonderful things that you can't even imagine right now will happen for you when you open that door and just let what wants to be born through you be born.
Ah, so good and so true. Things you can't even imagine, will start to open up for you because you're a new person. You're
Yeah.
different, or a new version of yourself, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for writing this book, Annalise. Guys, go grab a copy of Heal Your Witch Wound. Go to paperravenbooks.com/heal your witch wound. That takes you straight to the Amazon page. The ebook is free today. Go ahead and download that while you're here and while you're thinking about it. Now is the time. Things are changing. We are changing. And this is, I believe, going to be a book that leads the way for kind of the next generation of the feminine. So
yeah, side note to what you just said, if that's okay. Yeah, it's really for it was written with women in mind, but it's really for all the feminine, the divine feminine, whatever you want to call it, applies to all genders.
Annalise, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for being brave and vulnerable all at the same time. And I cannot wait to see how this book changes your life and the lives of your readers. And I think it's going to be phenomenal and beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any last words, Annalise, for your readers?
Just, if you feel like this has some magic or some medicine for you, I hope you'll follow that. And I hope that it brings it's just good food and medicine for your soul.
So good. Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Morgan.
Bye.